Zionism is a political philosophy which has brought about the state of Israel, the so-called state of Israel. This political philosophy has nothing to do with religion. On the contrary, it seeks to confuse others and let them think that Zionism and Judaism is one and the same. It is imperialism, it is racist, it has gone and taken the lands of the Palestinian people and through terrorism has driven them out, and through terrorism it maintains its power. And the United States of America, with over 6 million homeless, sends to Israel billions and billions and billions of dollars everywhere to bomb Palestinian people while homeless people are here and unemployed are here. Zionism is going to raise this war and make the people in America become clear to what it is and become anti-Zionist.
I also am a member of the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, and a coordinating council member of the Black Alliance for Peace. I'm going to ask, well, I first want to introduce, this is an esteemed panel here. These folks ain't no joke. This is serious stuff here. First we have my boss, Miss Jackie Lupin, the coordinator of the Black Alliance for Peace. She's our chairperson. And I'm not going to tell you how long I've known Sharon, but most of y'all wasn't born yet. Ardent Pan-Africanist all of her life, as long as I've known her. And currently, she is a liberation theologist. And so she's going to address these issues from a theological perspective and give us some understanding of the relationship of Zionism to Christianity. And then my new best friend, and Gray, I want you to know you my new best friend, not because you my new best friend. You my new best friend because you're a member of Students for Justice for Palestine. Yeah! And I love Students for Justice for Palestine. We've done some good work together since the Al-Aqsa flood. So, before I introduce Sharon, who will do the welcoming, I just want to let y'all know that as a consequence of what has been happening in Palestine and the implications of those happenings on the world we live in, the AAPRP has raised with BAP and the Students for Justice for Palestine and the Palestinian Youth Movement the absolute necessity for an anti-Zionist united front here in the United States. And we intend on going anywhere and everywhere to spread this message. This is the first gathering that we've had since we've declared our intention to build this united front. And if we can't get into churches, and we can't get into community centers, and we can't get in the big venues, then we're gonna go to the street corners and we're gonna go door by door. We're gonna knock on your door and we're gonna talk to our people about Zionism. So this is our intention. I'll leave it there and ask Sister Sharon to come and welcome you to this wonderful institution. Thank you very much.
I want to tell you welcome. But I also want you to really understand, so let me tell you a little bit about me. I think he said that he's known me for a long time, but for 19 years I was in the All-African People's Revolutionary Party and a civil movement. Since leaving that, I took to heart what Kwame Ture always said, is that we're always supposed to be working to organize our people. And if there's not an organization that you think is the right one, then you need to start one. So I started Black Radical Christians, because I was convicted and committed, and remain so, to the understanding that historically there've always been a Black radical tradition among Christians. That we understand that Jesus is a revolutionary, and that until our people know that and embrace that, we won't be able to move, I believe, many of the masses of Black people, of African people in this country. So it's our job through political education, through programs like these, to continue to struggle to lift up the radical Jesus and people who are willing to stand, fight, and transform issues of injustice. I also am associate pastor here at Salt and Light for Social Justice, and a couple of our members are here. So I was asked recently, why don't black people show up for Palestine? Where are we in the protest? Some of us are there, but we're not there often in the numbers that we should be. You know that, you're organizing in BAP and AAPRP, but the broad masses are not there. The first thing I say is, well, the civil rights movement really didn't always embrace the broad masses of people. We know that MLK was not supported well throughout that. We know that the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee was a really strong movement, but that it was probably the closest thing to a mass organization that got to people, but it still wasn't the everyday person you saw on the streets. And that is because we have a long way to go to organize the masses of our people and to transform their consciousness. Whether they're in ADOS, and think that the way to respond to the global issues that confront us is to increasingly narrow our view and understanding of what it means to be an African, to be black. Whether they are so dyed blue with the Democrats that they don't see when their own people are selling them out. We just had a vote here in Philadelphia where they decided, a predominantly black city council just decided to cut business taxes over the next 13 years, continuously. 60% of the city budget comes from business taxes. And they just decided, despite lots and lots of lobbying and protests, that they're going to cut city business taxes to zero within 13 years. So we've got work to do. Our people are really confused. Our people are not, their consciousness is not what we think it should be. But really, I believe that the major reason why black people are not supporting Palestine in the numbers that we think it is because of bad theology. And theology is a choice. Somehow, and I can tell you how later, we've been convinced that we cannot dare question anything about what people have told us is the state of Israel's right to Palestine. But we get this in terms of other things. We know that the theology that was used to enslave Africans was wrong. Our ancestors knew that when they couldn't read. They knew that the God of liberation that they served was not the God that justified and supported slavery. They made a choice. If someone was pushing that God, they didn't accept it. They made a choice. Theology is a choice. But what we've seen, especially since the 1960s and the 70s when liberation theology came out, is that the more educated a lot of times our leaders got, the more they've been inculcated by a theology that says that we must be passive, that we must not be critical. We refuse to teach our own congregants theology. They walk away then without the critical tools to analyze what they're being told. They end up following every evangelical preacher online, on television, and as a result, they believe that Israel has a right to Palestine. We know differently, and I'm here to tell you today that the Bible doesn't say that. That the Bible doesn't say that, and we'll spend some time understanding that there was tribalism in biblical times, just as there's tribalism now. That there are those who supported empire against the interests of the masses then as there is now. If we can read with critical eyes and understand that we can choose a theology of a warmongering, ethnocentric, racist God, we can also choose a theology of the God I see and that Jesus follows, which is a revolutionary God who stands up always for the poor and oppressed, who brings love and power to the people.
That's right.
So, Welcome to Salt Night. Welcome to this program.
On October 10th, the Palestinian Youth Movement, and I was in Washington, D.C. at the time, organized the first of dozens of demonstrations in front of the Washington Post, a Zionist organization. Y'all know the Washington Post is a Zionist organization. And those demonstrations continued up into the spring of the next year. The students in Washington, D.C., and it's been falsely reported that it was the students at George Washington University, but it was not. It was the students of Washington, D.C., from George Washington, from Howard, from George Mason, from the American University, all of the schools in the area got together and decided that they was going to build an encampment in George Washington University. That first day of that encampment, they invited us to come and talk to them because we had got to know them during the demonstrations. And we met what appeared to be 16-year-old kids who didn't know nothing about Zionism, really. All they knew is that bombs were being dropped on their homeland. And they came there and they took over that campus. Within 3 weeks, those 16, 17, 18-year-old freshmen and sophomore students at GW had turned from being the spoiled child of petty bourgeois Palestinian intellectuals living in the United States into revolutionaries. I saw it happen with my own eyes. And the reason I'm telling this story is because we've been organizing for a very long time. It takes more than 3 weeks to make a revolutionary, unless the conditions demand that the people involved become revolutionary at this moment, under these conditions, at this time. So we know from that process that we can accelerate the process of our development. We can go from not knowing to knowing in a lot quicker time than it used to take. And it's in that context I want to introduce Gray. Students for Justice for Palestine have over 200 structures throughout the United States. And they are connected. It's not just a student movement in isolation. They are connected to the Palestinian Youth Movement. They are connected to the forces of resistance inside of Gaza. They are connected to the African organizations. We have been connected to them since the very beginning. And it is in this context that I want y'all to really welcome the arrowhead, the tip of the spear, the force behind the encampments. My new best friend, Gray, from the Students for Justice for Palestine.
Hello. I'm Gray. I'm part of the Philly SJP Coalition, which is a coalition of SJP groups in the city. So that's Penn, Temple, Drexel, Haverford, Bryn Mawr, Villanova, and Swarthmore, yes. I guess when last year the encampments launched, that climate was a very different political climate to the one that we're in now when it comes to how the students are viewed and how the rhetoric has advanced, I guess. And so when we're thinking about like what the state of the student movement is right now, I think that one thing is that university administrations have done a very good job of separating us from the student body in a lot of cases. This is isolation, this is doxing from our peers, this is deregistration of our groups, bans from campus, police campus raids where they're like visiting our homes with guns, things like that. A lot of use of the police departments in the campus and also in the city and their counterterrorism forces, surveillance and stuff like that. But because of that amount of separation and isolation due to the university administration, it's my view that if the student movement wants to continue, they have to fundamentally oppose themselves to the universities and align themselves with the people where the university is an occupier of the city. And this is something that I think has been clear in a lot of the Philly encampments, where the encampments themselves, yes, did have students, but were also majority community. Because at a lot of these schools that are like predominantly white institutions, students aren't really aligned yet with Palestine. They aren't aligned with global liberation struggles, and so they're actually not the ones driving the encampment. The encampment becomes not only students against the administration's complicity, but also the city against the university as an occupier of them. And there have been attempts, or I guess Philly SJP has been trying really hard to build unity with a lot of these groups. So that's the camps in Kensington, that's the UC Townhomes, that's Chinatown. But there's also been a lot of tension because as students of these universities, like a lot of us aren't from here, and there's been even at, I guess, PPC rallies, SJP rallies and things like that, we've got folks who are standing next to us as we're marching and things like that, yelling at us, right? Like being like, listen, you're not from around here, you don't know what you're talking about, talk to us about like the issues that affect us right here. We've had people like literally tell us, like in quote, like come to the hood, like you've never been over there at all. And I think that it's a connection that we're still working really hard to draw more clearly, because in Philly, a lot of the enemies of the city are also the enemies of Palestine. So for example, the boards of trustees of all of our universities are the biggest land developers in Philly. They're the biggest gentrifiers, and they're also buying out land in the West Bank. They're also driving these like doxing campaigns. They're driving Canary Mission. These are the exact same enemies. The weapons manufacturers that are buying out buildings, that are over-policing the area, that are arming the police forces, these are all the exact same enemies, and so framing it that way is really important, and it's something that we're still trying to do better. I guess another thing that's happened in the past year is the resurgence of ICE, the disappearances, and things like that, and I think that a lot, in the media at least, a lot of the very high-profile disappearances were students, but because of the media focus on that, under our noses, thousands of other community members have been like shipped off in planes. Like we're seeing planes of Venezuelans, entire like buildings filled with people who aren't students but who are facing the exact same things. And so there has been a group within SJP that initially mobilized to defend each other and defend each other from ICE coming and taking international students, but is now pivoting to mobilizing for the community and things like that, because it's the exact, once again, the exact same struggle. I guess that's my view on the current state of the movement.
We got to talk about this one, about the need for the Palestinians to come into the hood. Because I have an entirely opposite position. I think we need for the hood to come to the Palestinians. We need to talk about this. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. There you go. And this revolutionaries in the hood who understand these things. You know. Next, we're going to go back to Sharon. There is an aspect of this Zionist movement that is designed to co-opt our people. It's designed to take our most heartfelt beliefs, our religious convictions, and to turn that into support for this Zionist entity. This is called Christian Zionism. Now, if you really know anything about Christianity and Zionism, then the term Christian Zionism is an oxymoron. Because you can't be a real Christian and at the same time be a Zionist. It's like Jewish Zionism. You can't be a real Jew and be a Zionist, and you can't be a Zionist and be a Jew. So this manipulation of our belief systems is an aspect of this struggle that keeps us from uniting with the people who are engaged in a fight with the same enemy that we're engaged with. So Sharon is going to kind of give us an explanation of how this Christian Zionism, what it is, what it does, and what we need to do to deal with it, because we have to deal with it. Our grandmothers and our grandfathers accept these lies as truth, and we can't go to war without them. So we have to get an understanding. So I'm going to share it. Okay, all right. See, women always telling me what to do, you know. I follow orders. Okay, so basic definitions. Zionism is a political philosophy that is part and parcel of the settler colonial experience and project of capitalism and imperialism. It is not a religion, right? It is a political philosophy that has an economic foundation, it has a social foundation, it has a political foundation, it has a theological foundation. It is part and parcel of imperialism. Zionists are settlers, which is the best way to describe. These are settlers. In 1898, I believe, in Basel, Switzerland, there was a meeting of a Zionist, the first Zionist Congress. And at that meeting, and you have to understand some of these things, that meeting was called by a man named Theodore Herzl. Who was Theodore Herzl? Was before even being an atheist, he was an assimilationist. In other words, he was a Jew who didn't want. He was a Jew, and he used to write plays about how it feels to be a Jew who's trying to assimilate into European society. Nobody went to see his plays. And in his disgust with the lack of support that he got for his artistic career, he became an atheist. And it was as an atheist that he called this Zionist Congress. So this is a person who's not saying, I don't believe in God. This is a person who's saying there is no God. And this person saying there is no God now comes to say that God gave them some land in Palestine. Now, when he first raised it up, the British didn't like the idea. They tried to give him Uganda. They tried to give him Argentina. But Uganda and Argentina did not have that religious connection that was necessary to mobilize Western European Jews fresh out of the Holocaust to get them to leave Europe and go to another country and settle and establish a racist Zionist state. They chose to plant themselves in Israel. Now, we are told that the state of Israel was established in 1948 as a result of a declaration that was made in the United Nations. But if you look at it like that, you're not going to understand the true history. Because a gang called the Irgun, which is the predecessor of Netanyahu and them pigs who is in power now, came into Palestine in 1917 at the end of World War I and began to massacre the Palestinian people. So this war on the Palestinians, this Zionist experiment, began with the death of the Palestinians at the hands of European Jews financed by Britain and the United States in 1917. We're doing over 108 years of this, y'all. They want us to think it started in 1948. In 1948, they established the State of Israel. The State of Israel is the world's, the number one export from the State of Israel is diamonds. Not raw diamonds, cut diamonds, polished diamonds. Diamonds ready to be sold in Manhattan, in the diamond district. The thing about that is, ain't no diamonds in Palestine. Them is our diamonds. Them is African diamonds. Them is stolen diamonds. They come out of mines in South Africa. They come out of mines in Botswana. They come out of mines in the Congo. They even still coming out of mines in Zimbabwe. I ain't gonna lie to you, I'm gonna tell you the truth. South Africa took them to court, but they didn't sever their ties with the people who are exporting our diamonds to Israel. So we see that this Zionist thing has this economic component, right? The state of Palestine is the size of New Jersey, but it's the world's 7th largest producer of military armaments. What kind of sense does that make? So we see that this Zionist thing has a military component. The other aspect of it is the confusion in our minds. Where does it come from? The mass media. Who owns that media? Well, the Washington Post is Zionist. The Washington Times is Zionist. The New York Times is Zionist. NBC, ABC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, you name all of the major media houses in the world are Zionist institutions. And you wonder why we don't understand Zionism. That's where we're getting our information from. And I get excited. Do you know that articles in the Washington Times, the Washington Post, the Reuters, AP, and all of them are being written at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia? This is where they're getting their information from. So that's the third aspect of this thing. The fourth aspect is intelligence. There are about 5 or 6 intelligence agencies in the world that are very good at what they do. Everybody knows about the CIA and the FBI and Homeland Security and the whole US intelligence complex. And British intelligence is somewhat famous for their ability to spy and lie and overturn and undermine people's aspirations throughout the world. But one of the next, and then of course there's China and Russia. But one of the most important intelligence agencies, particularly to the United States, is the intelligence agency of the illegal state of Israel, the Mossad, the Israeli Defense Forces. These are the people who do the US's dirty work. These are the people who go to places that the US don't want nobody to know that they go to assassinate people that they don't want nobody to know that they assassinated. These are the ones who provided the intelligence that was used to promote and then implement the destruction of Libya, the murder of Muammar Gaddafi, the invasion of Uganda, and the Entebbe happenings. So one of the main things, the main roles that the Zionist state plays is as an intelligence hub in the Middle East to provide and collect information to feed the US. It would be a mistake to think that Mossad and the CIA are two different things. Mossad is an aspect of the CIA. Mossad is in cahoots with the CIA. The CIA and Mossad is twins, born of the same mother, capitalism and imperialism. So these are the components of this Zionist entity. And we should understand these things because they affect every aspect of our lives, from the clothing that we wear, from the information that we have, from the lack of resources that we have access to. And I ain't even mentioned the fact that them Zionist pigs is probably training the Philadelphia Police Department and providing them with military-grade armaments to police our streets. And all of these things, we can show you how it affects your life. We can show you what they're doing to you. We can demonstrate the hard material fact of this Zionist oppression, not only of Palestinians, but of Africans and of humanity. We can show you these things. But we don't think that's the main issue. The main issue is the people's hearts and minds. The main issue is the ethical foundations of human life. The main issue is a moral issue. Yes, we can tell you be against Zionism because they are not against your interests. But that is not the message we bring into you. We against Zionism because Zionism is wrong. We against Zionism because Zionism is evil. We against Zionism because Zionism is the work of the devil on earth. It is not in the interest of humanity. It is a stain on the planet, and it must be removed for the well-being of all humankind. We are against Zionism because Zionism is against us and against God. So this is our main issue in our community. We're not telling you join the Palestinians because they're being murdered and the victim of genocide. We're telling you join the Palestinians because it's the right thing to do. We're telling you join the Palestinians because your preacher is lying to you, making you think this is God's work when you can see with your own eyes that no God would do the horrific things that are being done on a daily basis in Palestine and in Gaza. And before I give this mic to Sharon. I just want to say this. Yesterday, I buried my brother. And while we were in his memorial service, these Zionist pigs was bombing Iran. Oh, they finished with Iraq already, didn't they? Yeah, they did that. They gonna circle back. Y'all, the world is changing. This is no longer an isolated skirmish in a place called Gaza that's the size of this community. Now, without any question, this is a global conflict. And whether we are conscious of it or not, we have got to choose sides. And the one side we can never choose is the side of capitalism, the side of imperialism, the side of racism, the side of patriarchy. This is the side of history we do not want to be on. And so we have to determine what is our role as Africans in this country, victims of settler colonialism, in the fight against settler colonialism. This is our issue. We do not and are not asking the Palestinians to come into our community to organize us. We need to organize ourselves and play our role in this worldwide struggle against Zionism because it's the right thing to do.
That's right.
So it's in this reason why we're calling for an anti-Zionist united front. We're drawing the line. And everybody who stands on the other side of that line is not us. I'll talk a little bit later about us and them, because a lot of us don't know who us is, and a lot of us don't know who them is. And we need to know that so we know who to fight and who to unite with. And I'm not going to go there. Right now, I'm going to hand the mic over to Sharon, as I've been instructed.
Okay, now we're ready. In 2023, Nitri Rahab wrote he's a Palestinian theologian, and the author of many publications, including Faith in the Face of Empire, The Bible Through Palestinian Eyes. He's also written Decolonizing Palestine, The Land, the People, and the Bible. But in 2023, he reported that European Jews started their first Jewish settlement in Palestine at the end of the 19th century. In 1947, the Jewish population of Palestine owned about 5% of the land. In 1948, after the war, Israel took over 77% of historic Palestine and pushed 750,000 Palestinians off their land. Palestinian property was seized, and 86% of the land taken was declared state or absentee land for use exclusively by Israeli Jews. Palestinians were left with 6% of the land inside of the Green Line, which was set after the 1949 Armistice Agreement. And then in 1967, Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza Strip, in addition to the Golan Heights of Syria and the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. Since 1967, over half of the West Bank has been under Israeli military control. In violation of international law, especially the Geneva Convention, Israel has invested heavily in building and subsidizing colonies of Jews only, transferring over 800,000 Jewish settlers into Palestinian territory in order to alter the demography. They wanted to ensure that Israel had the land and the resources, while the Arab Palestinian population is forced into overcrowded towns, and now resources are surrendered, and the military controls their exit and their entrance. I just wanted to state that, to be really clear about what's happening. what has happened then, but we know even now what's happened since October 7th, 2023. Over 53,000 Palestinians killed as of May, and it's still going on. Over 118,000 injuries, close to 70% of verified fatalities are children and women. Over 900 medical workers killed, more than 900 Palestinian medical workers, including 165 doctors. Over 306 Palestinian humanitarian workers, including 222 UN staff who've been killed. Over 150,000 journalists, nearly 2 million displaced, about 90% of Gaza's population, widespread destruction, over 70% of homes destroyed, 12 universities, and 87% of schools. The healthcare system has collapsed. Only 16 of 36 hospitals are partially functional, and as you know, because of the constant bombing, severe injuries are dominant, life-challenging injuries, and there's a shortage of supplies. That's what we're facing. That's what we see then and now. And yet, much of the Christian community is silent. And we have to begin to ask why. And we have to ask why in light, especially for, I think, people of color who have seen this before. We know it when we saw it in South Africa. We know it when we think about Native Americans and how settler colonialism, settler colonists attacked and massacred and committed genocide against Native Americans. Yeah, that was a Freudian slip. That was horrible. But we know it when we see it. Yet we're somehow silent. And we're silent because Christian Zionism has seeped into our churches, into thinking about Christianity. Even if we're not regular churchgoers, we've come to accept this idea that God gave Palestine to Jews centuries ago and that they have a right to do anything it takes to get that land back. I'm here to tell you that that's just not true. That's right. The term Christian Zionism was first used by Theodore Herzl in that 1897 Zionist Congress. The largest group you should know of Christian Zionists is in the United States. But there's something you may not know, that they make up more Zionists than Jewish people. Christian Zionists are about 30 million. There are only about 7 million Jewish people in the United States. But 30 to 40 million of Zionists in the United States are Christian Zionists. And so Christian Zionists are those who believe, as I said, that the modern state of Israel, first of all, is the heir to Hebrew Israelites in the Bible. Wrong. Second of all, that God has a plan for supporting their existence and expansion that supersedes everything else we know about justice and right and wrong in the Bible. Stopping the genocide is one step. That's important. But there will be no peace without justice. And that justice means that Palestinians need to be restored. Palestine needs to be restored. And so to know this, to understand this, the masses have to understand the biblical story and how it is not the story of Zionism today. In his second book, Mitri Rahab says that this Christian Zionist theology has been constructed along with Zionism. It has been the religious theory that has been put forward at every stage in the development of Zionism to continue not only to pacify people, but to support the increasing violence of Zionists. Clearly, Israel is committing mass genocide. It has been since the founding of the State of Israel. But yet what blinds the eyes of the biggest supporters, these Christian Zionists, are three heresies. One, who is God? Is God a vengeful God of war or a God of love, justice, and mercy? From the perspective of Zionists, God is a vengeful God of war. This is also often consistent with evangelical theology. Secondly, who are God's people? I said theology is a choice. For people like me, we have to ask ourselves, is God a racist ethnocentrist who favors one group over all others? Or is a God the God who created all of us and seeks our growth, development, and thriving for all of us? Third, is the land for some or is the land for all? Would our God give the Holy Land only to Jews when our God is one who created all of us? And the Bible tells us again and again, created us equally in the image of God. If we've accepted all of these three heretical points, that God is a vengeful God of war, God is a respecter of persons, God is one who is racist and ethnocentrist and chooses one over the other and chooses to tell his quote-unquote chosen people to go into a land and massacre everyone. If we believe that, we also believe that the land is only for them, then we have chosen to believe a false Christianity. The Bible warns us that there will be those who will give a false interpretation of who God is. So we must believe those statements if we're to support what's going on now. And intuitively, in our hearts, we know that is wrong. So what do we do with scripture that tells us that? So yes, in the book of Numbers and Exodus and Deuteronomy, among other texts, God is seen as calling people to war and seems vengeful and actually tells the Hebrew Israelites to slaughter the Amalekites because they were not nice to you when you first came into the land. This has been taught in rabbinical schools and Sunday schools as God's command to destroy, to deny citizenship and human rights, and to steal the land of Palestinians. But you must be asking me, well, it's in the good book. How can you say it's wrong? I'll start by saying that theology determines how we understand and read the Bible. Theology can tell us, and this is a very distorted theology, first of all, that our hermeneutic, which is a theological term, tells us that we must believe everything in the Bible. We know that everything's not the same in the Bible. There are stories about what people did that were wrong. There are commands by God. If we're not teaching people theology and to look at theology, at the Bible from a lens that is critical and first deciphers between what is a command from God and what are stories that are correct things to do and what are stories that we're told that are wrong things to do, then we're leaving our people in a morass and ready to follow anyone who comes. Secondly, our theological lens has to tell us to what extent what we are hearing comes directly from God. First of all scripture is written by man but breathed by God and the Holy Spirit. If we are taught that God wrote and said everything in the Bible, that's hogwash. The Bible is written by people, breathed. What happens when we receive the breath of God? I don't know about you, but I interpret it through my own experience. I interpret it through my lived experience. So if the Bible story is unfolding in times where there is deep and consistent tribalism, their view of what God tells them to do is going to be rooted and steeped in tribalism. So when their experience tells them that they need to get vengeance on those people, when they believe God is sending them into the promised land, they believe that God wants vengeance. And so that's what you hear in this text. You hear those who are writing the text speaking from their experience. What they're saying is, I hear God telling me to go in there and I understand God's telling me that we need to go in and we need to conquer them all and kill everything, including their sheep and their goats and whatever. Right? That's what Genesis tells us, Exodus tells us, right? But, so, if we believe, one, that the Bible is a text that reflects not only what God said, but it's what people understand that what God said. Because the way we know what God said is because God speaks to us, right? We experience God. We have a loving relationship with Jesus and God. And so it is what we hear and understand. So we need to understand that. But thirdly, what I want to tell you is there's theology in the Bible. Even Jesus says and advances theology beyond the Old Testament. That's why we have two testaments. We have two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Jesus is the legacy of the Old Testament. But even Jesus doesn't refer back. He doesn't speak the words of that bad theology. And so what I'm telling you is theology develops through Scripture. Just as Scripture tells in Numbers and Deuteronomy that God is vengeful and calling for the ethnic destruction of some, it's later in Scripture that Jonah tells us that God called him to even go to the enemies, to go and preach to the enemies, because even your enemies, even those who persecuted you, even those who were opposed to me, ought to be a part of your community. My point in telling you this is you may have at stages in the Old Testament one theology, but after the Hebrew Israelites are taken off into captivity in Babylon, they come back with a new view. They come back with Jonah. They come back with Ezekiel. And in each of their theologies, they call Israel to something different. In Ezekiel, we learn that even though prior to their theology in Genesis, God says, to your offspring I will give land to Abraham. In Deuteronomy 4 recounts that Moses ascended to Mount Nebo and was shown the promised land to go into. But after the Babylonian capture, a new stage of theology emerges in the Bible. And in that new stage, in Ezekiel 47, God reveals an enlightened theology. Distribute the land to everyone, he says through Ezekiel. Share it, not only with immigrants, which we've heard in Leviticus before, but he says, you yourselves are immigrants. There's some who go around and propagate a story that the Hebrew Israelites were there before the Amalekites, the Canaanites, the Samaritans, who are predecessors of Palestinians. But the Bible tells us that Hebrew Israelites were themselves immigrants and aliens in a foreign land, in Jerusalem, in Palestine. And so in Ezekiel, we're taught that they are not only to share, but they are also to recognize, to be recognized, and to recognize others as full citizens. My point is, one, there is theology throughout the Bible, and it evolves. If we want to make the point, as Zionists do, and try to trick us and argue that the Bible tells us that God decided in the end that all this is to be for them, we are mistaken. One, as I said, there are various theologies. Theology in the Bible continues to evolve through Scripture. It ultimately evolves to Jesus. And Jesus sends people into the whole world. Jesus calls us all family. Jesus denies this whole separation and says that we're all part of his family. This idea that Christian Zionists have, that in order for the gospel to be fully realized, Jesus has to come back, and we have to help him do it, is what Christian Zionists believe. Christian Zionists believe, what's his name? The guy, what's his name? John Hagee. So there are several Christian Zionist organizations, the International Christian Embassy, Christians United for Israel, the Christians United for Israel is chaired by John Hagee. You may have seen him or heard him on television. He is a Texas-born pastor of Cornerstone Church in Texas, and he argues that in order for Jesus to come back, as in Revelation, we have to help him. We have to help Jesus come back by eliminating all Palestinians from Jerusalem and Palestine in order for Jesus to come back. The problem is that this has been infused throughout our churches. This view that God needs to be vengeful and is vengeful. This view that God's people are chosen and elected. That there are a limited number of people, that the God who made us all, the God who loves us, the God who provides for us, the God who provided all creation, it limits his care, God's care, her care, to a few. And the idea that the land was for some, what the Bible tells us ultimately is that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. That the land is God's. And that we are stewards of it. But we don't understand that if we only see one theology, and that is the theology of the dominant hegemony. Mitri Rahab reminds us that settler colonialism needed its own ideology. It needed a theory, a political philosophy and theory, and an ideology that would convince us that this was God's work, that would align with this view. And so not only did Christian Zionism begin in the 1800s, even it began earlier than that as a belief in the 17th century that that Christianity taught us that Palestine belonged to Israel. But it also continues to be an ideology that's grown alongside settler colonialism. It wasn't until after World War II that Jews began to propagate, Zionist Jews began to propagate the idea that Zionism was a religious belief that should be a part of the state of Israel. Mitri Rahab reminds us that initially what they did is they focused on convincing Jews and Christians that we should be together in this belief. You know, some of the first ships that sailed from Europe to settle Jews in Palestine were on a ship called Exodus. And that was intentional. He outlines for us how they intentionally constructed a theology that would support and advance the idea that this state of Jews from around Europe are the heirs of the biblical Hebrew Israelites. And so I want to stop there, but I do want to say that in order to change how Africans, how people of color who are in the church view Israel and understand Zionism, we must be able to debunk these theologies. We must be able to challenge the idea that of who God is, of who God's people are, and whether the land is for some or for all. This means we have to decolonize our churches, our theology, our curriculum. Brother Sam Katab is here, and his group, along with Friends of Seville, are doing that work. We in Black Radical Christians are doing that work to decolonize Christianity, to remove from it the vestiges of Zionism, imperialism, racial capitalism, and patriarchy. And that's a part of our struggle.
All right? You sure?
I won't give you too much at one time. All right. The Black Alliance for Peace is an important organization that is drawing a clear picture of U.S. complicity in the militarization of our lives as African people on the planet Earth. It's not just in Philadelphia and New York and Boston and Atlanta and Chicago. It's everywhere that we are, that these imperialists have embarked on a military approach to solve the black people problem. Y'all know you're a problem, right? And not only are we a problem, but we're a problem that sits at the base of the economic reality of the societies that we live in. Anywhere you go, when you find African people, you find us on the bottom of the heap. And they're intent on using military force to keep us on the bottom of the heap. And so these are the things that the Black Alliance for Peace focuses on. And so we're going to ask Jackie to try to make some of these connections between the U.S. military axis of domination and what is happening to our brothers and comrades in Palestine. Please welcome Jackie Wu.
Peace, everybody. I am Jackie Wu. I'm the chairperson for the Coordinating Committee for the Black Alliance for Peace. I find myself in an interesting position because I am like at the nexus between faith and walking that faith out. I'm the liberation theology Christian who loves Jesus. You can't tell me he ain't real because I've seen him do too much crazy stuff in my life. I'm still here because of him and what he's done. But I also know very well that faith without works is dead. There's no point in me having this strong faith in a Jesus that only does for me. That, I believe, is garbage. Jesus is not my personal genie. God is not my personal ATM machine. When Jackie has problems, she can go pray to her God and get her stuff straight. And everybody around me is wallowing in pain and misery and capitalism and imperialism. I have never believed, even when I didn't even understand my own holy texts, didn't even read them at first, I never believed that made sense to me. It didn't make sense that God would save me from a thing, but he ain't gonna save 48 other people who all succumb to the same thing. And you mean to tell me all these other people are going to hell just because they don't believe that Jesus Christ is the Savior? Come now. Let's stop with this foolishness. So there's a lot. As a Christian, I do challenge and I do exactly do what Sharon said. Read the scriptures now critically from a lens of anti-imperialism, right? From a lens of, is this a word for enforcing the rule of the powerful over the weak? Or is this a word for empowering the weak to not just survive under the rule of the powerful, but to organize and defeat the powerful? Because believe it or not, I kind of started to read the Bible and realize that all this preaching Jesus was doing, he was organizing. The Sermon on the Mount was not like a picnic, y'all. The Sermon on the Mount really was Jesus giving us the example for how we go to the people with the good news. Jesus went to the people with the good news, and the people he went to were the poor, the downtrodden, the oppressed, because he himself was a member of an oppressed group occupied by the Romans. So who does he go? Not the petty bourgeois, not the business owners, except for the tax collector, who, he let hang out with him as an example. that anybody can change and be just as powerful in this revolution and just as useful, but they must change in order to be useful to the people. And who else told us something like that? Walter Rodney. When Walter Rodney, an intellectual himself, said, listen here, you be careful about these intellectuals, because they silly. And they are the enemies of the people until they prove otherwise. So as a liberation theology Christian, understanding how the Christian faith has been twisted and messed up and misinterpreted and we've been lied to, I understand that a part of my job as a revolutionary is that I have to show myself approved of the revolution because of my faith and the damage the people of this that have used this faith have done. And I'm cool with that. That's my job. That's all right. Because I think it is necessary for people who are in revolutionary struggle, who adhere to a faith, to make it clear that not only are we not the enemy, we understand that our spiritual belief has been weaponized to prop up imperialism and the imperialist occupation and brutalization of the very people of faith. Imperialism is all in the church. This Christian Zionism, this evangelical white Christian nationalism, it is imperialism dressed up in a cross. And being a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, understanding what imperialism really is, the connections to capitalism, and then finding out the connections between all of the struggles of all of these oppressed and beaten down and beaten up and people who've had their land stolen from them and people who have been bombed all over the world, understanding the connection between the misinterpretation of all religions, all of them, not just Christianity, but that's the one that's been the most effective. Understanding the role of imperialism in using spiritual belief to justify itself, to get people of faith to support imperialism against other people, learning the connections between the Palestinian struggle and the African struggle, and the African struggle of people in this country, and the African struggle in Congo, the struggle of our people in Haiti, the struggle of our people in Guatemala, in El Salvador, in Hawaii. Understanding that imperialism is just not about getting people to believe a thing about people in power, that they're really your friends. Imperialism at the root of it is about land, resources, and people, and who controls it. And the imperialists never want it to be us. But as Sharon just said, the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. We're the fullness. And the resources under our feet are the fullness. The land belongs to the God who made it for all of us. And our job is to make those connections, to protect what he gave us. And that includes each other. So in the Black Alliance for Peace, when we say that our primary campaign, our foundational campaign, is no compromise, no retreat, defeat the war on African people at home and abroad, we start with us because we understand that we have to educate our people. We are the ones who have to. The Palestinians don't need to come to the hood. The Palestinians do not. They are trying to survive a genocide, and we gonna tell them you need to come to the hood and see how we living. Do we not understand that the Palestinians are living the Palestinian version of the hood? The way our ancestors were forced to show papers to prove that they should be off the plantation. That's the kind of checkpoint system that Palestinians have to undergo to this very day. And they're not the only ones. So what do you mean somebody needs to come to the hood and explain and see how we live? And no, we who come out of the hood, it is our responsibility to understand why we are forced to live in the hood. It's imperialism. It's pan-European hegemony distilled that is turned into this global lust for resources and power and land and control of the people, so the capitalists can make a whole lot of money, so they can build their ivory towers, so they don't have to listen to our screams. While we're down here screaming in our silos, we in the Black Alliance for Peace realize just since 2017, Black Alliance for Peace is a very young organization, just 8 years old. But the conditions, as Rafiki has said earlier, about the development of the political consciousness of the students in the encampments, the conditions facilitated the rapid growth of the Black Alliance for Peace. Not because we're so bad. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Look, now, I'm newer to organizing than my age suggests. I'm 56. I've done protests, yeah, I've done teach-ins, attended them, but I've never been a part of an organization. I joined the Pan-African Community Action in 2014, joined back in 2017, and I grew in my understanding of imperialism and the connection to the struggle of our people in this, I'm in church, can't say that word, of this place. I learned all of the tendrils that imperialism connects Black people here to working class, poor, oppressed, peasant, marginalized people all over the world. I learned that from these young folks sitting in this room. I have had to learn the way I just caught myself cussing. The Black Alliance for Peace does not exist in a vacuum of we're the vanguard of the revolution. No, we're not. No, we're not. We haven't been around that long. We're not that. We got numbers, but our own process of maturation continues, as all organizations and all true organizers should. If anybody in back ever comes in front of you and says, "We are the way," please call me. That will be the last time you will hear them speak in public. We are not the vanguard. We are revolutionaries. We are the foot soldiers. Yes, we have a line and we push it. Our enemy is imperialism. That is the line. If you have excuses for imperialism, you are on the other side of the line. You are our enemy. We'll make some space for you so you can learn some things, but if you never move to imperialism is the problem, well, you stay over there. And once we understand imperialism, we begin to understand all of these other issues that are named a different thing, that affect different people in a different way, but are all connected to imperialism. Like in India, you've got Hindu nationalism, right? Which is a different thing. It's something that we are not familiar with, but it is a part of the Pan-European imperialist project. When we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about Zionism. That's a word that was not mentioned much in the churches. I grew up watching John Hagee. My grandmama watched that man every doggone Sunday. And I never liked him and I never knew why. And Pat Robertson. And I could go down the list of names. Yep, Billy Graham, Pat Robertson, John Hagee, Oral Roberts, Benny Hinn, oh Lord. Joel Osteen. That's another conversation. But, so in the Black Alliance for Peace, what we spend a lot of time doing, I would say we probably spend 60 to 70% of the time working on our outward-facing work, is making these connections between these struggles, what everybody says are not connected, but we know are. The material conditions prove it. So when people say things like, well, Palestinians should come to the hood and see how we live because don't nobody care about what goes on in the Congo, because that always comes next, right? It's like an indictment on another oppressed group of people not caring about how we are oppressed, And then they bring in, well, they don't care about what happens to Africa. Let me tell you the connection between the Palestinian struggle, us, and Congo. It's Israel. It's Zionism. Because the weapons that are being used in Congo, and some of those resources that are being stolen from our people in Congo under the regime of, what's his name, Kagame from Rwanda, backed by the U.S. and armed by the U.S. and Israel. There are IOS soldiers in Congo helping to slaughter Congolese people, and they're not just in Congo either. And these are the same people who use technology from companies like Palantir to surveil people in Gaza and the West Bank. But that same kind of technology is used by police departments to surveil us. And that same technology company also works with Mossad and the CIA to gather, collect information, including facial recognition technology. In Iran. So if you think that the bombing of Iran has nothing to you don't care about those people in Tehran digging through the rubble. You should, because the same people who are genociding Palestinians are the same people who are training Philadelphia PD, MPD in Washington, D.C., lots of major police departments. The knee on the neck, where do you think that came from? When you look at pigs in Israel kneeling on the necks of women and children in Gaza, and you see them do it here, what do you think, that's a coincidence? You think they all had a mass hysteria dream and they were all just like disconnected from each other? Ooh, I can kneel on somebody's neck. And the Israeli soldiers taught U.S. police that tact. So the connections between the struggles of people suffering under the boot of imperialism, pan-European domination, the militarization of local, state, federal, campus police, and now, as Dr. Sharice Burton-Stelly of the Black Alliance for Peace called it, the policification of the military. Which is not a new thing, because the military has been deployed on the streets of the United States many times in the past.
Yesterday.
Before yesterday. So people are freaked out. Oh my God, you deployed the Marines. Oh, so you remember you forgot all those uprisings? Where the National Guard and the military were down in the streets of New Jersey? In the streets of Detroit, the streets of Ferguson. All of that excess military equipment that is loaned or given to for free or sold at a very cheap price from military theaters of war around the world. After they've reached whatever expiration they have, they don't scrap that stuff. They give it to the cops. And the cops use it against us. And then from what they don't give to the cops, well, Israel gets the first pick. But they also give them surplus information or weapons. And then Israel develops its own stuff and then shows the United States, hey, look what we did. We put a gun turret on top of a surveillance camera. They actually did that. That actually exists. Israel created that thing with the help of Palantir. Where do you think that's going to be used next after it's successful in Gaza? Right here. So when we are engaged in our campaigns that start with a focus on ending the war against Africans here and abroad, that is a starting point. But we understand that that's a starting point because we are not in this war alone. We're not the only people that empire is waging war against. We're not the only people in this country who are among the colonized. We are a domestically colonized people. And we understand that because we understand the relationship between colonization, colonialism, settler colonialism, and imperialism. It's a historical through line from one to the other. So the same way the IOF has created an apartheid system, colonized Palestine, and forced Palestinians to live in the equivalent of Bantustans that are just like the Bantustans that the Dutch created in South Africa. How can we not look at the conditions of our hoods and not understand we are living in the exact same conditions? So how are we disconnected from Palestinians? How are we disconnected from the Congolese? How are we disconnected from any other group of people anywhere who are struggling against colonialism and imperialism, settler colonialism, racial capitalism? How? We are not disconnected. Not at all. We are not only connected, unity, solidarity, and I don't even really like the word solidarity anymore because, like Rafiki says, how am I going to be in solidarity with my brother? How am I in solidarity with my sister? You come mess with Rafiki or Sharon. I'll include you because you're my friend too. If anybody who's his friend, they my friend. Mess with Gray if you want to. Mess with these Africans over here. Just try it. What you'll see is not solidarity. I tell you that much. You will see a whole lot more than some solidarity. We don't need, and the Black Alliance for Peace does not exist to foster solidarity between oppressed group of people. No. We exist to build a united front of working class and poor, oppressed, marginalized people to the struggle for African liberation, one united Africa under scientific socialism. Because once we get that, everybody gets free. That's right. So we exist in that not as an isolated struggle for the liberation of African people alone. There is no liberation of African people without the liberation of all people from, because that's the key. What are we liberating people from? If we do not destroy capitalism and imperialism, none of us will be free. And Africans will not only be free if we destroy capitalism in the United States. We cannot claim to fix what's being done to us in the United States without understanding that we must expand that struggle to the influence and the reach of capitalism and imperialism everywhere that it exists. We destroy the system, we free us all. And that is why we say, no compromise, no retreat. That is not a catchphrase. We mean that. This is not a negotiation. We're not negotiating the terms of the release of our people. We don't negotiate with terrorists. We are in this for the fight of our lives. We are not organizing just to raise the consciousness of our people. We must do that because people have to understand why they have to fight. And people have to understand that fight means more than protest sometimes, as we're all seeing right now. So we have to prepare our people for what is to come, and what is to come, it ain't nice, y'all. What is to come is not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. It's going to be unpleasant. But freedom is worth fighting for. And peace does not come with imperialists through negotiation. So we fight or we die. We fight together or we die together. If we don't fight, we certainly will die, all of us. But if we fight, and if we fight together, we might not win tomorrow. We might not win in my lifetime. But if we fight together and if we commit to fighting together every day, I guarantee you, victory is certain. You cannot do this work if you don't believe that's true. So that is what BAP is. That is why we exist. Zionism as a point of struggle in the battle against imperialism is critical to understand, and that's why we had to be involved in creating what we are building now, a united front against Zionism that will start here, but it will not end here, not until that beast is dead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Is the question of us and them. Now, we've heard a lot of talk about capitalism and imperialism and Zionism and racism and settler colonialism and patriarchy and neocolonialism, and we kind of understand, at least from what's been said here today, who they are. But the hard question is, who the hell are you? Now, quite frankly, I'm a member of Black Alliance for Peace. And the first meeting I sat down with them is, what does black mean? Because I don't know what a black person is. I don't know what a person of color is. I don't know what a Negro is. All I know is that they stole us from Africa and brought us here. And a lot of our people still, but maybe not nobody in this room, they still trying to be American. They still trying to get their piece of the pie. They still trying to suck up to the people who are destroying our lives in Africa, in the United States, in the Caribbean, in South and Central America, in Europe. They are still trying to get some personal wealth. And that's why they keep a hyphen in their name. And they get upset with me when I tell them you are African, but they don't get upset when they filling out their government form that says African-American, because they all right, as long as they got some American connected to the African. But I told you before, these is oxymorons. These are oxymorons, and we have to be understanding clearly who we are so that we understand the nature of the fight that we have to engage in. We are African people, period. When we talk about us, all of us ain't us. Some of us is them. And some of us who is them might be sitting in this room with us right now. They always show up. And we don't always know who they are. But we understand that the enemy never sleeps. The enemy is 24/7. And we have got to get to that level of struggle where we understand our external enemy, our internal enemy, and the enemy that exists in your own mind. The backward ideas and concepts and principles and precepts and positions that the enemy has injected into us to make us fight against ourselves and against our own people. This is the reason why Africans are not in the street in support of the struggle against Zionism, is because we don't understand Zionism. And this is our responsibility to make the people understand Zionism, to understand that we are at war, to understand the nature of the war, and understand the methods and processes that are required in order to win the war. We must win the war. Defeating Zionism is an integral step in the process of defeating imperialism. Supporting and being in solidarity and standing with the Palestinian people is part and parcel of the African Revolution, and the African Revolution cannot be successful unless the Palestinian Revolution is also successful. These Bible stories, I'm up here here with theologians, so I gotta be careful. Have us thinking that our understanding of Palestine is to be gotten from the Zionists who are now occupying Palestine. Long before there was any such thing as a Jew, long before Abraham, there was a relationship between Africans and Palestine. Because since the last ice age, if you wanted to walk from Africa to anywhere on the face of the earth, you had to pass through Palestine. Every place else you got to swim. So that means that every human being that left Africa to populate this planet in the last at least 10,000 years, and it looks like maybe over 150,000 years, passed through Palestine. We know Palestine better than the so-called Zionists know Palestine. If they want to know the history of Palestine, they need to come talk to us. Don't think we need to come to you to find out our own history. That is our history. We have to understand it, and we have to understand ourselves. The last point before we open this up is on the question of solutions. We have demonstrated, we have blocked ports, we have shut cities down, we have shut campuses down, we have fired drones at the U.S. military floating into the Red Sea. We have lobbied, we have taken them to the International Criminal Court, we have taken them to the International Court of Justice, we have taken them to the United Nations, we have lobbied the U.S. Congress, the British Parliament, the French Parliament, the German Parliament, every parliament on the face of the earth. And the genocide continues. So it means that the movement has to go into a new stage. It means that the tactics that we have employed over the last several months are not sufficient in order to achieve the objectives that we set for ourselves. It means that we have to have a different kind of analysis. Our analysis is twofold. One, the enemy is Zionism. Genocide is a consequence of Zionism. You destroy Zionism, you stop the genocide. We understanding this? The enemy is Zionism. Zionism must be destroyed. I've been in the All-African People's Revolutionary Party all my adult life. And in 1978, our party advanced a slogan, just 2 words, smash Zionism. We passed out over 500,000 flyers throughout the United States saying smash Zionism. And really, besides strengthening our relationship at that time with the Palestine Liberation Organization, nobody paid us any attention. Now, people think that smash Zionism is just a slogan. But smash Zionism is not a slogan. Smash Zionism is the result of a critical analysis of imperialism and the processes that are required to destroy it. Smash Zionism is a strategic approach to this struggle we are engaged in. So when people come to you and say, we need a ceasefire, you tell them, smash Zionism. People tell you we need to lobby Congress, you tell them, smash Zionism. When people tell you we need to go to the UN, you tell them, smash Zionism. There is no solution. There is no halfway. There is no negotiation. There is no reform of the Zionist entity that will result in the liberation of the masses of the Palestinian or the liberation of the masses of African people. The only way to do it is to smash Zionism. And we want us to understand this. We want to take smash Zionism into our homes, into our churches, into our schools, everywhere. Tell our people the problem in Palestine is Zionism. Zionism must be destroyed. In order to smash Zionism, we got to come together. We got to unite. We got to unite in such a way that even though we have differences among ourselves and between one another, we will set those differences aside in order to engage in this fight against Zionism. That's what a united front is. This is not a coalition. We're not coming together for a 6-week campaign. We're not coming together to get some kind of reform. We're coming together to engage in a permanent struggle. And this is the last aspect of this. Not only is this struggle generational, in the sense that all the generations that exist at this time are engaged in the struggle at the same time, but it's also generational in the sense that it's going to continue generation after generation after generation after generation until Zionism is destroyed. This is protracted, long-term, permanent struggle that we are calling for. And we're calling all organizations, if it's the Boy Scouts, if it's the Girl Scouts, if it's your local basketball team, if it's a football team, if it's a church organization, a school organization, a student organization, or an organization that came to you in a dream last night, all of us need to come and join the Anti-Zionist United Front. This is what we're trying to build. And this is the conversation we're trying to have here today. And this is what we want to bring to you, and this is what we intend to take everywhere we go. We've been talking to these Palestinian youth, and they understand the limitations of the activities that they were recently engaged in. They see the consequences of the school's reactions to what they did, and they know that there are no promises from these Zionists that's going to help them. So they don't want to negotiate, they want to be free. And in order for them to be free, in order for us to be free, we have to defeat the oldest and most reliable tactic of our enemy, which is divide and conquer. We need a united front. The liberals are not going to join this united front. The Democrats are not going to join this united front. The NGOs, which some of y'all love so much, I know it, you don't have to admit it, are not going to join this united front. Because this is a people's organization that we're trying to build. And we've invited you here today to share this analysis so that we can begin this process of building an anti-Zionist united front in the United States. We have already connected with anti-Zionist forces in Europe. There is a Palestinian, African, Palestinian solidarity network of Africans throughout the continent who have come together to fight against Zionism. We know anti-Zionists as far as Australia and Hawaii and Canada and South and Central America. All of us have to come together in a common struggle against Zionism as an aspect of our struggle against imperialism. And this is the purpose for our meeting here today. This is what the message we come to bring to you, and we really, 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 really want to hear what you think about this idea and to tell us what we can do. One, to begin to add organizations to the list of groups in Philadelphia who are members of the Anti-Zionist United Front, and two, the process by which we can spread this message across the United States, into Canada, into South and Central America. This is not no overnight thing. This is going to take time. This is going to take effort. And the first thing that all of us and all of our organizations have to do to make this thing real is show up. Be present. And be a part of what's going on to change this world that we live in. So we want to thank you all for joining us, and we're going to turn the floor over, and you can ask us anything, and we the kind of organizers that are willing to say we don't know if we don't know. So we're not trying to act like we know everything. We know some things, but you may know other things. So anybody that has a comment or a statement or an idea or a thought, the floor is yours.
To discuss the question of the people who have been at the top of the oppressive line happen to be one race of people. Alright? Everything, whether it's Christianity, revolution, apartheid, whatever, it came from Europe. So the Eurocentric aspect of imperialism, somebody please say something about it.
This is difficult because what you say appears to be true. But when you do a deep dive, it's not necessarily so. Right? Yes, imperialism came from Europe, built on the backs of the poorest of poor in Europe, intent to keeping those poor white folks poor and in service to imperialism. We in the United States had this black and white thing. Everything black and white. But when you look at the rest of the world, it ain't like that. And the perfect example of it is the Palestinians. They talked about the 750,000 people that was forced out of Palestine. Where do you think they went? Everywhere. So I know Zimbabwean Palestinians, Algerian Palestinians, Egyptian Palestinians, New York Palestinians, Palestinians from everywhere. These ain't white people. Some of these Palestinians have married white people and pulled those white people into the struggle against Zionism. So we have to be careful with these analyses that are based on the color of people's skin. Because Che Guevara was an African. Woo! Fidel Castro is an African. And they both white boys. Mobutu Sese Seko is a European. He just looked like you. So it's not about the color of your skin. It's about your class relationship to the society that you live in and whose interests are you fighting for. They killed Chris Hani for fighting for the liberation of Southern Africa, right? And we know the story of John Brown. Now me, I love me some John Brown white people. I really do. And then knowing the history of the struggle that has taken place just here in the United States, I really like to turn the table. You know, they used to use us as what they call cannon fodder. Cannon fodder is the people who stand in the front of the line and take the first attacks from your enemy. They usually die quickly. You understand? And I ain't got no problem with some John Brown white people cannon fodder in our struggle against capitalism and imperialism. Because the victory is going to cost us some blood. And we, like Malcolm used to say, we don't want to be the only ones bleeding. Right. So I think that it's important that we begin to mature in our political analysis. We have to take our national reality into consideration. That is, what is the condition of African people around the world, those who make up the African nation? How do we assess ourselves as a people? A. Then we have to take into consideration our gender conceptions. Because you know how my brothers are. They've been hoodwinked into aligning themselves with their enemies against their own families in this patriarchal, male, macho man, I'm in charge type crap. So there's a gender aspect to this struggle that must be considered every step of the way in order to determine who's on our side and who's on their side. And then finally, this thing has a class aspect. Because all white people are not part of the bourgeoisie. And all Jews aren't Zionists, and all Zionists aren't Jews. So there's these class relationships that are an integral part of our analysis. And when we look at these black and white issues, we got to look at the class, the nation, and the gender aspect of those issues in order to get a proper understanding of what's actually going on. Okay, I'm going to pass the mic, but I see a hand back here.
Food, there's food. Come eat if y'all.
All right. See, they telling me what to do again. So I saw this hand first, and then we're going to go to Petros, and then we're going to go to Erica, and then we're going to come back over here to Jibo. And can we take your questions, like take all 4 questions, and then approach them, or just take them one by one? The mic? Yeah, it's kind of long, but y'all can come up.
We don't need a mic.
I think I can. I think I can answer. You spoke, and you pretty much answered it. But you spoke about Gaza and you spoke about imperialism, and I'm thinking of the housing problem we have with gentrification and the class struggle that we have here. Is there a relationship between Gaza and what we're going through in terms of housing and the minority communities in the United States?
Yes, there is. Gentrification by genocide.
Yes, yes. And that these are the kinds of connections that we do make it back, because it doesn't seem obvious, right? From the first thought, you think, gentrification in the U.S. and working class and poor, particularly Black, Indigenous, First Nations communities, it looks a certain way. We know that the communities that our families, generations of our families grew up in, a lot of us, particularly Africans from the South, since before the Great Migration, right? But certainly since the Great Migration, we've got generations of people up in Southeast DC. And DC is not Chocolate City anymore because of gentrification. But when I think about the displacement that occurred in Palestine before 1948, 100 years before 1948, how is settler colonialism that was practiced to establish the United States? I don't like saying United Snakes because I actually like snakes. Yeah. Snakes ain't never done nothing to me, so I stay out of their way, stay away, they stay out of mine. We cool, so But we understand that the displacement, the mass displacement and the resulting genocide. We can also call it, like Rafiki said, displacement through genocide that happened to establish this country with the indigenous. And we can even look at particular states, like how Hawaii became a state, right? Like how Puerto Rico is still a colony, right? Those people don't have a sovereignty over their own land right now. When we look at these examples and we look at how DC turned from Chocolate City to Swirl City, I guess. It's what, I'm sorry. I was doing so well. But there's no way you can look at the patterns of the outcomes, even if the entities that are used to carry the process out. In gentrification here, real estate developers are used to fuel gentrification, right? Real estate developers, venture capitalists, corporate interests. In Palestine, with the settler colonization of of Turtle Island before the establishment of the United States, with the colonization of Hawaii, with any type of settler colonialization, it's the military. But aren't the things that are done the exact same? Isn't the outcome the same? The original inhabitants of the land are moved off of that land to make way for a population of people who were not from there, who were brought in to take over that land for the profit of a whole nother group of people. It's the same thing. Gentrification is settler colonialism by another name. That's how we analyze it. So that's yet another way that our struggles are connected. Because again, these liberation struggles against colonization and against imperialism, they're about what? Land, resources, people. Thank you.
I guess also when it comes to Philly as a city, the entities that you were saying that are displacing folks in Palestine and displacing folks here are the same entities a lot of the time. So, for example, like the boards of trustees of a lot of the occupying universities here, Penn, for example, raised in Blackwater neighborhood, and those boards of trustees have bought land in the West Bank and have bought land here. So it is often like we follow one of the exact same entities.
Yeah, and if gentrification means displacement, then the most horrific gentrification in the history of the world was the removal of youth from Africa, bringing you here against your will. So we should identify gentrification instantly, because we have been the world's most serious victims of it. Erica? No. Petrus.
Just a simple question, just a definition, because I'm hearing a bunch of stuff. Can so all of you or one of you define just what is a class and what is a race, and then what does that mean in what we're doing here? And what does it mean with something that you're explaining about capitalism or settler colonialism? Can you explain that? No. Anybody can answer that question.
Well, I would say something interesting. We often talk about class from the perspective of Marxism. We talk about people's relationship to the means of production. So those who own and control the means of production are the bourgeois class, the ownership class. Those who don't, the further you are away from the means of production, the lower you are in terms of the hierarchy of class. But I like Saint Ray's definition. Saint Ray says you are either a part of the people's class or the anti-people's class. And what's great about that one is it gets to your values, right? And your behavior, right? Are you serving in the interests of the masses? Are you working for the masses? Or are you working against the masses? That's a good
Thank you.
So what else can we do with race?
Yeah, race, that's People very often, when they ask to define race, they always say, you know, race is a social construct, it's made up. And that's true, that's very true. But that does not mean that it doesn't have a relevance in the way we address some issues, but not all. For example, the term racial capitalism. Capitalism itself is exploitive to all people of those not in the capitalist bourgeois class, right? And that includes all living things, including the environment and the animals. Race, however, in the context of the way capitalism is applied to certain groups of people, specifically, I think, in this country, it is not something that is as prevalent, the racial capitalism aspect of it, in countries where race was not created and used as a construct to create this hierarchy for oppression, right? Racial capitalism is something that I think can be applied, maybe not specifically and only to the United States, but certainly to places in the world where race as a construct used to justify the domination of a group of people is also attached to capitalist exploitation, right? So I never, and I could be wrong in this, and my thinking is always kind of evolving when I'm presented with better ideas. I don't like to dismiss race in this struggle because it does apply sometimes. But I think the mistake we make is that we look at the entire struggle through the lens of USians who have to deal with race. And we think that we are only dealing with racism, but it's not really that. What it is a class issue that uses racism as a way to foment the divide between the working class element that should be united. Race is used by the ruling class to divide and conquer. This is why working class solidarity in this country, labor organizing between white workers and black workers and immigrant workers had a little bit of success, and then somehow these coalitions fell apart. One of the ways was because too many white workers were convinced that if they just stopped organizing with the blacks and the immigrants, then they would be treated better. And too many believe that. Now, does that same phenomenon happen in a place like South Africa among South African miners? Well, no, because everyone is South African except for the ruling class, who are the Afrikaners or the Boers. So they couldn't use race necessarily to divide the working class. A little bit of the colorism with the, you know, the colors and the, you know, the blacks and that kind of thing. But that was more of a tribal kind of thing, a sort of delineation, hyper-delineation within that class. They couldn't use racism necessarily as effectively in places like South Africa, where this race issue was not a part of the way the capitalist system was used against certain groups of people. So yes, racism and race, it absolutely is a created construct, because there is no genetic justification for why we think we are different just because we look different. There's nothing in our genes that makes us quote unquote black, separately from quote unquote white people. Melanin, yeah, but genetically, no. So what are we talking about when we are defining the thing called racism that we're talking about? Now we're talking about all the different ways imperialism controls everything we understand. The control of knowledge, the control of education. How does imperialism create a thing to call other people and use that thing to divide people? So what we're talking about really is not a fight against racism. When we boil it down, we're still talking about imperialism and settler colonialism, but just all of the ways that they come up with different ways to divide us, right? So I feel like when we're defining race, we need to put it in the context of its relevance to this struggle. I don't think we can just say, yeah, race is a social construct, it's made up, it's not real, so let's not focus on it. That's not true either. We can't not focus on race, not in this country. But focusing only on race is not going to get the results that we want either. Because then, what are we going to do with the Blackness Leadership Class? You understand? What are we going to do with the Congressional Black Caucus? What are we going to do with Beyonce? Dear God, what are we going to do with Beyonce?
Leave her right out here.
We ain't ready for that one.
Okay, let's stop. Bye.
You in the studio.
I ain't scared to be high. I just let you know. We have Jibo. We have a hand over here. I'm sorry, Jibo. You're after Eric.
Well, I did want to just add, even to the gentrification, if we look at what's happening, even with the plans that Trump has, quote unquote, that were plans that we've seen, obviously, that existed through Biden, those real estate agents live in Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York. So they live in this area. So the same ones that are investing in the overturning of Newark and the overturning of Brooklyn and the Bronx and Harlem, the overturning of closer to the zoo, right there where my aunt lives. Those are the same kind of investors, or the same investors with the same backing that we see that are invested in making a whole new Gaza Strip. So that was one thing I wanted to add. But my question really, in listening to you all, because I come from a family who had TBN on all day and all night. My grandmother would not allow you to talk bad about those folks. But I do, is evangelism, as we understand it today, is it akin to, equivalent, the same as Christian Zionism? Are they a one-to-one? Are there different aspects if they are both, as I've heard you all explaining it, or mostly you, Sharon, speaking about the similarities in terms of like the end goal or how they express themselves. So I am wondering, is it safe to say that evangelism and Christian Zionism are like a one-to-one?
So, as we mentioned, evangelicals do make up a large proportion of Zionists, Christian Zionists, but not all. There are some more progressive evangelicals, but this evangelical movement, as you know, has spread significantly over the last 50 years or so, coming out of the moral majority, and the establishment of Liberty University has really helped to spread it. But what I will say is that evangelicalism is in and of itself not the same as Christian Zionism. They are a part of it. What's interesting to know is that many of them are what we call dispensationalists, and those are the people who believe, as I was saying briefly, that we are in the end times, that Jesus is coming back soon. We've been saying that for centuries. Jesus is coming back soon, and that in order for him to come back, and check this out, so the Christian Zionists, in order for Jesus to come back, when Jesus comes back, he will cast all believers, and especially Jews who don't recognize him, into the burning sea. So, in many ways, Christian Zionists are anti-Jewish. But they are, politics makes interesting bedfellows, right? They are partners now because they support opposing and ending Palestine. But Christian Zionists fundamentally believe that unless Jews convert, they need to go. And Zionists know this, but they're willing to align with them in order to overthrow Palestinians and Palestine. And so many evangelicals are, yes, dispensationalists, but not all of them.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so Jibo, Asante. No, is Jibo her? something. Let's see, put your hand down. I can't remember. I'm doing my best I can. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I just have two quick comments to add to the question. The first question by Nikki over here, what was the relationship, if I recall correctly, between Europeans and racism and imperialism? I want to point out that the English colonized the Irish for 800 years. And so the Irish understand settler colonialism really, really well, and therefore they are one of the most vigilant supporters of the Palestinian struggle than any other Europeans are, especially. So, you know, racism, or you could call it ethnocentrism, they're both white, you know, but the Irish suffered under the boot of English colonialism for 800 years. And when they came here, you know, there was a hierarchy of white people. There's a book called How the Irish Became White in this country. So that's a little bit to add to, like Rafiki was saying, the class aspect to it. I also wanted to mention a name that some of you may not know. His name is, this is a black American man named Dumasani Washington, and he is the outreach coordinator for Haiti. And he's the outreach coordinator, and he is a black Christian Zionist. He's the leader of a black Christian Zionist organization called the Institute for Solidarity, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. And guess what? They have a student wing. That's all I'll say.
What's his name again?
Dumasani Washington.
Dumasani Washington. Dumasani, well, he had a nerve to have an African name.
Right.
Because I'm for taking these African names back from some of these.
And you got a book out too.
That's all right. Yeah, we gonna rename them John or Henry. Something like that.
So you might want to call him an African.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to say something real quick about the hold that Zionism has on regular black Christians, because I keep telling people we don't read our Bible. We don't. And that's just not Christians. That's most people of most, whatever it is you believe, even so-called revolutionaries. You know how hard it is to get revolutionaries to read? And they want to change the world. They want to wage a revolutionary war. We cannot get them to read on protracted struggle. They can't. They don't. So even people of deep faith, we get a lot of our faith wrong because we don't read the actual book. We don't read the actual words. We don't study the context that the stories are told in, historically and politically, what was going on at the time, to make any kind of sense of what is said, and some of it is confusing. So a lot of black people in churches accept this stand with Israel thing because of something that I think Malcolm described so well about Christians and the way we exercise our faith. We have been convinced to accept any kind of abuse here on earth because we're told that our reward, we are only going to get justice after we die. We are only, so our reward will be in heaven. That's what they tell us and we're supposed to suffer whatever indignities that we have to suffer here on earth with Christian grace, turn the other cheek, that's a misinterpretation too. Love your enemies. We are told that we're supposed to remain peaceful, meek, and mild in the face of all horror, all violence, and all terror, because our reward is in heaven. So we are literally indoctrinated by the white supremacists who took out the liberation texts from the Bible that show that God is on the side of the oppressed, and created the slave Bible that had all the texts that told the enslaved and the oppressed to shut up and take it in God's name. And don't fight against empire, obey authority, because all authority is ordained by God. All of it, even the genocidal ones. So a lot of Christians, just regular folks, black folks, are sitting in churches listening to a Zionist interpretation of scriptures, not even realizing that they're being indoctrinated with Zionism, because the only thing they know is the Bible says I am supposed to be meek and mild like Jesus. And if I consistently stay meek and mild and I just pray when things are bad and wait for the Lord to fix it, then I will get my reward. Probably not here, but in heaven. But they completely forget that Jesus went up in that temple with a whip.
Yep.
He went up in the temple with a whip.
Yep.
And he ran the money changers out of the temple because they were ripping the people off. So if you don't read what Jesus actually said and did in response to the oppression of the people, it is easy for a lot of regular Christians, particularly our people who should know better than to silently support genocide and the oppression of another people. This is how it's done. It's not just through, the everybody agreeing with Zionism. It is through just the misinterpretation and the indoctrination that happens through our basic understanding of our faith.
If I can. You're nicer than I am. I have been in a pulpit when I prayed for Palestine, and as I was walking away from the pulpit, my former pastor said, you gotta keep your hands off of God's chosen people.
Wow.
So my position is this. Yes, some people have been preached and taught into passivity, but I would say further that many of our pastors have led us wrong. And I think they've led us wrong, one, because there's actually been an effort since the 1970s and the immersion of liberation theology by conservatives and conservative theologian seminaries to reach out to offer scholarships and to actually, in many ways, indoctrinate black pastors. Up until that time, black pastors were typically bivocational, meant they were teachers for a living and got a little stipend for their churches. Now we have more and more black pastors who are like other mainline pastors who are pastors for a living. And what came with that is an increasing number who have seminary degrees. Seminary is not bad, but if you go to seminary and you are taught Zionist theology, you are taught oppressive theology, and you think that's all there is, you come back and you teach that. And so they're not critical a lot of times. And the other thing that's argued that has really led to the increasing conservatism of black churches is faith-based money. So it goes back to the Clinton administration, churches beholden to federal government funding. Even when they establish nonprofits and the nonprofits do it, then they are very careful about what they preach and what they teach, and finally, prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
So those are big problems. But fundamentally, we've got to teach our people to think critically about scripture and recognize that different people read it differently. You have to know their interests and know your interests.
Okay, finally.
So my question was kind of to that point, honestly, because just in the breaking down of Christian Zionism, I really appreciated because I didn't know that. But even for Christians or people who are theologians who don't read the Bible critically, there is a very strict distinction between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the Old Testament speaks to a God that is vengeful. And what differentiates Christians from Jewish people specifically, or one of the things, is that we do employ the New Testament, which does speak to a God of promise. And so even if you're not reading the Bible, or if you're not, like, you don't really, like, understand it fully, like, the story of, I guess that was, what, Jonah? Is that him? Yeah. So, okay, like, the rainbow and God's promise and all those things. So if we're Christians because we believe in the New Testament, how do you have a conversation with people who are still, I guess, still, like, believing in a God that is vengeful, even though what differentiates us, like I said, is the fact that we are supposed to believe in the New Testament?
First, I say, read Naim Matif or Richard Graham, two really powerful Palestinian theologians. I didn't understand until I read Matif that the answer to many of these even Old Testament views that God is a God of war who's vengeful is right in the Old Testament, which is what I tried to refer to and didn't do it very well. But in the book of Ezekiel, in the book of Jonah, they all come back and say that was bad theology. They all come back and correct. Even Isaac at one point corrects the old bad theology from Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. And so what that teaches us is what makes sense, that if indeed the Bible is, as all other religious texts are, to be alive and continuously living and effective in helping us to apply them in contemporary times, that they even evolve. That within the text evolves over time. So my first answer is, even in the Old Testament, it's not true, I would argue, as Naim Matif does, that God is only vengeful and warlike. And again, remember, what you say to people is, remember, people are writing this in their context. We read the Bible hermeneutically. We read it from its context at the time, and we read it from the perspective of a standard. And if our standard is love, we're looking for that. If our standard is the God of development, growth, and care for people, we look for that. And that's the God we believe in. But we don't only have to say that. We can see the evolution of theology in the Bible, even in the Old Testament. So that's the first thing. It evolves even in the Old Testament. We've just landed on, because we're in a capitalist and imperialist culture, and they are the hegemonic, dominant purveyors of knowledge and thinking. So we land on and have all been taught that that's what the Old Testament says. That's not even right. Right? That's one of the views that's given in the Old Testament, and as it progresses, it gets better. It gets more enlightened. It becomes more inclusive. It becomes more unifying. It becomes more radically good, And, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said we need a revolution of values. The values change tremendously. And then, of course, the highest point is Jesus, right? And so, in many ways, as I was saying, even Jesus doesn't refer to those old bad texts. He refers to the texts that support the movement he's leading, the revolutionary movement. Because throughout the New Testament, Jesus refers back to the Old Testament, but not to the junk, not to the theology we need to move beyond. So the other kind of trick, the other way to really understand it is to look at what Jesus refers to in the Old Testament. So a lot of people will argue with you, they're two parts of the same Bible, don't just throw away the Old Testament, rely on the New Testament, because Jesus comes out, he is prophesied in the Old Testament. So yes, but look at first the red letters, what Jesus says. Secondly, look at what Jesus refers to from the Old Testament. And that tells you what's important.
Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Asantua. I'm a member of Black Alliance for Peace here in Philadelphia. Two quick things. My brother, for your question, just to give you an example, I was part of the Save Chinatown Coalition, the battle we had against the 76ers basketball team that has not won a championship in almost 40 years, but yet they won a new arena, right? So one of the co-owners of the 76ers team is David Elderman. He is the former vice chair of the board of directors of the Jewish, quote unquote, Zionist Federation of Philadelphia. They were harassing us of the Phillies for Palestine Coalition because we went to certain Zionist-owned businesses here in Philadelphia, and we had our protests, and we had our large protests, right? And they were, you know, trying to say we were anti-Semitic and yada, yada, yada. But because we were so large and so effective, right, they pressured our current mayor, Mayor Terrell Parker, to do her Stand with Israel thing with her Israeli flag. David Alderman also owns some apartments here in West Philly, some kind of student apartments, right? And the students who live in those apartments have a hard time getting the landlords, which would include David Alderman, to fix them up properly, etc. I'm saying all that to say these are the connections that we've been talking about here. David Alderman is right here in, well, he's with the 76ers basketball team. But as the three co-owners of the 76ers team, none of them lived here in Philadelphia. Just to give you one example. So this is why we say all these things are connected. And as we do our research, because we had a research team, we find all these things out. And we find out the pressure they put on our politicians here in the city. Lastly, I went to the No Kings rally earlier today, and we had a Palestinian solidarity contingent. And we were doing chants, and we had a bullhorn and all of that. Because for those who spoke, we knew they would not mention Palestine, but we wanted to be heard anyway. Reverend William Barber spoke, and he mentioned Palestine in passing. Congressman Jamie Ratner, or whatever his name is, he didn't mention Palestine at all. But not surprising to me, though, was Martin Luther King III spoke. He didn't mention Palestine or Gaza at all. Not that I'm surprised. But if you're going to step up and to the whatever as your father and your mother, right? Dr. King and Mama Coretta visited Palestine in March of 1959. Martin Luther King III has yet to say anything about Gaza. He has yet to say anything about the U.S. and Israeli war against Gaza, and he has not spoken boldly against that the way his father spoke boldly against the U.S. war in Vietnam. So this tells us, what do we do about our quote-unquote civil rights industrial complex leaders? If you Google Martin Luther King III in Israel, do a Google. A few years ago, Martin Luther King III gave some kind of award to some Israeli official, and that official gave him some kind of award. What are they giving awards to each other for? So I'm saying all that to say, all these things are connected. Martin Luther King III is in Atlanta. He has not said a word about Cop City yet. The Atlanta Police Department trains their officers in Israel. Martin Luther King III, Reverend Raphael Warnock, all those folks in Atlanta, the mayor of Atlanta, have not said anything about the police department being trained in Israel. Not a word. Who's paying for that? So this is where we need to do our research, right? And find out who's paying who and why do they do the things that they do. We can talk later.
Remember, I'm here and here, and then what two? One, two. Okay, wait a minute. I'm not being shy.
You need to write it down, Rafiki. Rafiki. What an age now, we have to write stuff down now.
Especially when we get older.
That's right. Tell them, G-Bo.
Okay, I'm gonna holler at you on one later, Rafiki. But I think one of the questions that you all had posed was how to build this united front against Zionism, and a huge part of that is going to be propaganda, and that's why I said I'm gonna holler at you later. But the propaganda can be found in history, and it can be found in the Palestinian resistance themselves. In December of 2023, the Palestinian resistance called on all the Christians of the world to rise up for the defense of Gaza because all of their holy sites are being targeted. There's it's very tangible ways to connect the Palestinian struggle to both Africa and to religion. You know, the co-founder of Hamas was an African. And, you know, through our radical tradition, you know, be it through Malcolm or, you know, Kwame Ture or, you know, just the standard in radical African politics, you know, we can exhume that history to, you know, kind of bring it home for Black people and for Black Christians. You know, the resistance call themselves, they say, we're from the cradle of Christ. And that's, you know, that's a powerful line. And, you know, we got to seize on these things that make us emotional. You know, Black folk are emotional about Jesus. You know, well, look at what's happening to his homeland. So, yeah, it's really about how we psychologically frame things to catch everybody, you know. And I know I got more to say, but I'm gonna just leave that until I get something else. Thank you.
That's the propaganda.
Oh, I forgot to mention this. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. First, I want to thank you all for speaking to us today, because this was really clarifying, I think, and really helpful. One thing that I wanted to make comment about is, I think tomorrow is Father's Day.
Is that right?
And I mean, the reason I mention that is not just because I'm sure many of you will be honoring your fathers, or maybe you as a father will be being honored by your kids, hopefully. But that when we talk about Palestine, and when we talk about the people who are killed by Zionism in Palestine, everybody mentions the women and children. And I think it's important to mention, of course, women and children. I mean, this is an aside, but of course we shouldn't discount Palestinian women. One of my favorite Palestinian resistance fighters is Layla Khaled. Absolutely. And she was a woman, and she became kind of the poster face of the PFLP for a while. But I think it's also an aspect of propaganda that we have internalized to allow the discourse about men to be only the discourse about fighters.
Right.
But also the other way, right? To understand the discourse about fighters to only be about the discourse about them as terrorists or militants, and not as fathers.
Right.
Because what would you do if your kid was facing Israeli bombs? You would rise up, you would fight with a gun, right? It's no question of that, right? And these people, I mean, if we're talking about smash Zionism as a concept, the people who have done that most consistently in the world are the Palestinian people, are the PFLP, are Hamas, right? When we talk about, like, when you talk to your friends and your community about Palestine, I think it's really important to say those words, to talk about Hamas, to talk about the PFLP, and not to hide behind this politeness rhetoric, where we're like, oh, we can't mention the people that are so quote unquote terrorists, right? Because they're not terrorists. The terrorists are sitting in office, and the terrorists are the people who are propagating this. So we have to be willing to say that stuff out loud and say, look, I'm not going to condemn Hamas. I'm not going to come out and say like, oh, well, I don't know if I should believe this, or I think, you know, it's a complicated this or that. No, Hamas is right. They are right. If you're talking about who is us, that's us. That's the people who you would join, right? And even if you wouldn't join them physically, you'd be there with them in mind and spirit. Because even if you couldn't fight with them, you'd support them. You would hide them in your house. You would hide them because that matters, because that's how you propagate the struggle. So I guess what I'm saying is, as that coalition builds out, and as people start talking to more people and talking to your neighbors about Palestine, don't forget that Hamas is not just this organization which is faceless and nameless. They are people. They are people like Yahya Sinwar. They are people like Ismail Haniya. They are people who are fathers. They are people who are brothers. They are people who are siblings. They are people who are community members, who are religious leaders, who are people who are tied to their community in a way that is actually deep and important. So, I mean, we should hold that and remember that tomorrow, as you think about Father's Day with your fathers or your kids, that there are so many people in Palestine fighting for their children or fighting for their fathers who are actually raising the guns. So that's all I have to say.
Oh yeah, just a really quick question to the sister from Students for Palestine, right? You identified a slew of schools, Penn, Bryn Mawr, Penn, Temple. What has been the response from Cheney and Lincoln universities? Are you, okay, good. Those are two HBCUs. I was just wondering. Do you know whether they've been, what's the word? Have they been contacted? Do you know? Okay.
I joined Philly SJP this past year, so I don't know the extent to. I joined Philly SJP this past year, so I'm not sure the extent to what the reach out to Cheney and Lincoln, but it's a good question. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'll say something about Cheney. So some of y'all know I'm a full protest at Cheney. Nothing's happening at Cheney by design.
One of my comrades from Philly SJP has mentioned.
We aren't directly connected with Cheney, but through NSJP, like our national chapter, we're fairly connected. And just like at our universities here in Philly, their schools have shut them down from the get. There's been students who've been suspended. I don't think there's been any expelled at Cheney specifically that I know of off the top of my head, but they didn't have as much action as we have here in Philly a little bit. I'm not necessarily sure what the reason for that being is, but they have faced from prior action, including like banner drops and things like that. They were hit much harder than some of our schools here, like Bryn Mawr or Villanova even, but much more in line with like Penn or Drexel in terms of aggression towards their students.
I want to speak in general about the HBCUs. I kind of consider myself something of an expert because I was a student organizer for 40 years. Stuff has changed on them campuses, y'all. If you take Howard University, the Mecca, as an example, right? And this is all universities. All universities are first and foremost a real estate company. And it's a real estate company where the board of directors of the real estate company have given the equity in their real estate to developers. So at Howard University, the construction, maintenance, and development of dorm buildings and classroom buildings and administrative buildings has been contractually signed over to a former military director. These people used to build those horrible barracks that the people live in. These are the ones who are building the dorms at Howard University. And Howard University doesn't pay them to build the dorms. Your student housing fees go directly to these developers. The students at Howard, was last year, the year before, went on strike because of the horrible conditions of the dormitories. Now, when they went on strike, they tried to negotiate with the administration. And they actually went into negotiations and signed a secret agreement to end the strike. I never heard of that in my life. Students signed a secret agreement. Now, they signed a secret agreement, if you know how Howard is situated. Administration is right here, and the encampment is right there. So hundreds of students are sitting outside waiting to hear what they agreed to, only to find out that they couldn't reveal the agreement.
They were pressured.
Now, why? Because the administration has a memorandum of understanding with the developers, which means that they are responsible for those dormitories, and the administration have no say over what happens in them dormitories. The equity in the land that those dormitories are built on is being used to fund the development of the dormitories and taking all of those resources out of the hands of the administration of the school. When we was organizing at Howard University, you couldn't walk across campus in an Army uniform.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
You couldn't come up to Howard talking about the ROTC.
Nah, man.
We found a CIA agent who was connected to UNITA, teaching at Howard University, and we ran him off the campus. Now, the FBI, the CIA, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, Homeland Security, and DC Police Department are all based at Howard University, and it is incorporated into their curriculum that they are trying to create a pipeline from the elementary school straight into the FBI. This is what's happening on these HBCUs. They got the defense contractors, this is what's happening. And they're pumping millions and millions and millions of dollars into these schools for the purpose of turning these students into agents of our enemies. And this is why there is no big outcry on the university anymore. The students don't know. We had students tell us at a rally supposed to be against Zionism, that demonstrations have been proven not to have any effect on the social conditions, and then justify that statement with reference to France Fanon.
Wow. Wow.
Jackie had to make me sit down and shut up. Rafiki, chill out.
I wouldn't stop you at all.
So, okay, now I'm in trouble. All right, so there has emerged this thing. I can't really say I understand it, because to me it don't make no sense. Called Afro-pessimism. Okay, she said before I go there, let's take this other hand. So I'll come back to Afro-pessimism. Let's me go over here first.
So I just wanted to say, like, while this discussion was going on, this entire time, Tel Aviv has been being bombed.
Oh, yeah.
This entire time. And Haifa.
Let him finish.
And Haifa. So yeah, I got the report from my friend while you guys were speaking. It's been a really good day. Now that I've heard this. And I also wanted to respond to something you said about gentrification as well. I'm a student at Temple. One of our board of trustees members, his name is Leonard Barak. He was a former financial chairman, or like a financial coordinator for AIPAC, and he was the vice president of the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia. And if you know anything about Temple, you know how Temple is. They destroyed a high school 10 years ago. They're currently pricing out that entire area of North Philly. And he's a vice president of the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia. The Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia, which Asanto already mentioned, is funding a settlement in Jericho. Like, they're actively pulling funds, and they have a lot of money, into a settlement in Jericho that they're loudly advertising. They're also fundraising for the IOF unit that destroyed Gaza City. that destroyed Gaza City in 2024, early 2024. And it's called the Shaldog Unit. They're the same IOF unit that bombed a nuclear reactor in Lebanon. And they are responsible for this is like they're embedded within our like university structures. So, you know, it's very difficult sometimes as like a student organizer when people talk about the student movement, when in a lot of ways students are patrons or actively complicit, you know, in our university, which, you know, like they're like, I'm a proud Temple student or I'm a proud Penn student. And we hear this a lot. And we hear this self-aggrandizing of our position as students in the struggle when like we're paying a lot of money and we're benefiting from these structures that are both gentrifying communities here and are like actively funding like IOF Air Force units. You know, it's so like as a student, like, you know, it's no wonder sometimes why this like the movement for Palestine has remained stagnant within our ranks. It's because our ranks are like our class nature is reactionary oftentimes. You're basing a movement sometimes off of like a class of people that benefit from the power structures they're trying to undermine. Yeah, so I just what Asantua said really made me think about where did she go? Oh yeah, what really made me think about like that specific thing.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, we got any more hands? Any more hands? Let me see, any more?
Yeah, I guess I sort of had a kind of comment to the response around the Old Testament versus New Testament, because I think something that I noticed, and I think is hard to sometimes parse in the movement, is we talk about how Zionism is different than Judaism, but sometimes we don't practically believe that. And so there's a way in which anti-Semitism is being used now as a way to discredit, but actually it also is a real thing, and in some ways predates sort of blood racism. And so I guess the reason I was interested in saying that is like, there's like a rabbi, his name is Abraham Heschel, and it actually isn't true that the Old Testament sort of preaches of a specifically warmongering God, which was already spoken about. And I think it's sort of important to sort of name how sometimes we also don't create a space for those who want to be anti-Zionist Jews, and in doing so, often lose access to their entire religious community because we sort of also have beliefs that undermine their reality. And so that was something that I was thinking a lot of, like, how do we create space? Like, yes, Christian nationalism is in itself anti-Semitic, but also a lot of practices of Christianity are in themselves anti-Semitic, insofar as they necessitate the erasure of living Jews. And so that's just something I'm thinking about, where it's not, as Christians, we understand, or people who are Christian understand how when religion gets mixed with state, it becomes violent. But in itself, there's a sort of attachment to religiosity and spirituality that also, I mean, I think if you speak to a certain section of practicing Jews, they will tell you that their religion is oriented about love. And of course, the Hebrew Bible isn't only situated in the past, they sort of have continuous oral tradition, or the Talmud, as it's being understood and sort of made sense of. So I don't know, I was just saying, like, I feel like sometimes it's hard to do that because we're in a place where religion and statehood have become combined. But it is actually true that even some of the violence that is happening is because Jewish people were massacred across the globe. And so that was just something I was thinking about, like, how do we make sure to, it's not always relevant when you're sort of thinking about people's whole communities being massacred, but there is a way in which it seems sometimes that we're not imagining a world that actually includes Jewish people. And that sort of concerns me because that's also not a world that I want. So that was
Who are the Semitic people?
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, we can, I guess what I'm saying is then remove the word. But I
I guess what I just want to say is like when we have ideas that there's an Old Testament and a New Testament, and the Old Testament is bad and the New Testament is good, this is not true. It just sort of erases people's actual realities. So you can remove Semite and you can sort of, because yeah, you can think of the whole Levant region, but I guess what I'm saying is like, I do think it's important to create space for that, because then you end up in a situation where people can't actually join and they can't create space to be a part of the revolution if when they enter those spaces, there is a kind of confusion about Zionism and Judaism as people speak about it, even though they say they're not confusing it. So that's my thought.
So when I have this conversation about Zionism with Jews, I first of all remember Reverend Jeremiah Wright.
Come on.
And Reverend Jeremiah Wright used a scripture that I think is in the Old Testament about how God says that he hates any nation that oppresses the poor. And he will condemn any leader and people. He will condemn any leader who oppresses the poor. And if the people in that country in which the leader is oppressing the poor, God will deal with them too. And then God goes on to say in Psalm, or whoever the writer was, in Psalm about God, I believe it's either Psalm or Proverb, that God hates the wicked everything. He hates it. Yes, God hates things. He hates behavior, not people. And God hates the behavior of the wicked every day. And then when we talk about, well, who is the wicked? We'll go right back to what he said about leaders who oppress the poor, leaders who take from the vulnerable, leaders who deal unjustly with their people, right? Like, and that's from the Old Testament. Now, Christian nationalists, particularly white Christian nationalists, have been using the exact same scripture to wage the war against abortion, right? They have literally said God hates the oppression of the innocent. He hates the shedding of innocent blood, and they've conflated that to mean abortion, although abortion is not mentioned anywhere in the Bible. So I think that what I've done, and I'm not sure that this is a right approach, I just find that it's worked well for me. When I'm talking about the Old Testament, I understand that I don't know as much about the practice of Judaism through the lens of the Old Testament as a Jewish person enough to speak about how I should talk to them about what the Old Testament is or is not for them, what the Torah is or is not for them. But I can point to my understanding about what God means to me and point to the commonality that we have. God hates the repeated oppression and the Holocaust against your people just as much as he hates what was done to our people, just as much as he hates what is being done to the Palestinian people. Why do I know that's true? Because the scripture literally says, God does hate the shedding of innocent blood. God does hate leaders who oppress the poor, who marginalize the weak, who harm their people. And God will condemn and judge those people. And along with that, and if God is no respecter of persons, like it also says in the book, then God hates your oppression as a Jew, because you're a Jew. God hates our oppression as Africans. God hates the oppression of the Congolese. He hates the oppression of all people who are oppressed by those in power, because that's what the book says. Jeremiah Wright told the truth about who God is and the nature of God in regard to all oppressed people from the Old Testament. So I think when my response has always been to focus less on what other people understand about the way they express their faith. And I think I respond that way because I still believe that it's my responsibility as a Christian to do exactly what the Bible says. They will know me by my fruit. I think that's how I make space for other people. I have to show that I understand that my faith is a faith of hope and power for the oppressed, all of the oppressed, because it says so in the book. I don't think I really know any other way to address that, to kind of make sense of how we do exactly that. You know, how do we make space for people whose faith expression comes from the same place but looks different, and we don't want to exclude them, but we also absolutely want to affirm this is the belief, this is the faith, this is where the fight for justice from a spiritual, biblical, Judeo-Christian perspective comes from, regardless of how you exercise your faith, I think.
I agree with Jackie in many ways, especially that this is about values fundamentally, right? And so, regardless of who you are, and I think scripture speaks to that, this is fundamentally about your values and how you live and act them out. So if you're standing with people who are oppressors, that's a problem. That's wrong, and it's a problem. Those values that you are expressing, regardless of what you say, if you're standing with the oppressors against the oppressed, then that's problematic. But I'd also say that I think the proof is in the pudding. That Zionism, which as Rafiki said, the AAPRP has been lifting up for decades now, has clarified a lot, along with the conditions that people are seeing. We have the largest number, the Jewish Voices for Peace has grown in this period. There's the largest number of anti-Zionist Jews that have ever been counted before. And I'm not discrediting what you say, that there may be spaces where people don't feel comfortable, but clarifying Zionism really is a critical key to it. Yeah. Now, I also empathize, Brother Sam Khattab is over here now. He works with Jews, Muslims, and Christians, especially Palestinians. But, you know, and making space for people to work together. And it is concerning. When I heard just now that Tel Aviv and Haifa have been bombed also, in some ways you feel like cheering, but in other ways what Jews have to also know is that unless they're standing up, that means more bombs on them too. Yep. Right? And so this isn't only about the suffering of Palestinians, but it's also about their suffering as a result of Zionism. And so I think the way to make space for people is to identify with our shared humanity, you know, and show how the oppression of those who are most weak, those who don't have power, also is reflected in and affects your oppression as well. But I can't get distracted by the powerful over the weak. For me, the focus has to be on the weak. For me, the focus has to be on the dispossessed, but I won't sacrifice the humanity of it.
I see. I'm not especially religious. We are revolutionaries. And our analysis is primarily derived from a concrete analysis of the material and immaterial conditions of the people who are engaged in the struggle against imperialism. And we think the history has to be gotten right. We have been told time and time again that the most horrific thing that happened in World War II was the massacre of 8 million Jews. And we are not denying the murder and massacre of 8 million Jews. But we also remember the 20 million Russians who gave their life to bring an end to that Nazi experiment. We are also aware of the Africans throughout the African continent who had to fight against Germany in order for the European countries to solidify their colonial territory in Africa. We are not confused about this history. And what we know of religiosity is that you cannot serve the devil and God at the same time.
Right on.
You got to choose.
Yep.
And if you choose to stand on the side of the devil and call yourself a Semite in face of the overwhelming reality that the Semitic people are not Eastern or Western European Jews who settled in Palestine, if you choose to stand on that reality, then you will get the result of everybody else who settled in that territory to displace the masses of Palestinian people. We are not confused. In the U.S., this is the biggest contradiction because nobody wants to acknowledge the fact that this is a settler colony, that the masses of Native American people have been destroyed, tens and tens of millions of them, wiped off the face of the earth so some pig named Trump could be president. No, this is reality. We didn't choose to come here. I ain't never liked it here. But I'm a poor man, can't afford the ticket back. But I understand reality. There are 5 settler colonies remaining on this planet, right? And all of the others serve this one.
That's right.
Israel serves this one.
Right.
Australia serves this one.
That's right.
New Zealand serves this one.
Right.
And the continued secular occupation of South Africa, some of y'all think it's over, well, they still own the mines. And 87% of the land serves this one. So when we call people to destroy that Zionist entity, we're fighting U.S. imperialism. When we talk about the rights of the Kanaki people in New Zealand and their fight to regain control of this land and support them in that effort, we are fighting U.S. imperialism.
That's right.
When we talk about what has been done to the Aborigine people in Australia and the rights that they have to the land that was stolen from them, we are fighting U.S. imperialism. Yep. We're not confused at all about this question, who our enemy is. And the U.S. imperialism are fools if they think they're getting off the hook because today we're focused on Zionism because we're going through Zionism to get to U.S. imperialism. So this is what we have to understand. I want to quickly, before I take these last 2 questions, to touch a bit on this Afro-pessimistic thing.
Oh, Lord. Lord help us.
Right?
Watch out, Rafiki.
Because I ain't afraid. Y'all want to be Americans. Brandon had to wait. And you want to exceptionalize the African experience in America in order to set yourself up to get a piece of the pie. Right? This is an attempt to divide our movement and to make us think that the struggle of black people in this place is separate and apart from the struggle of Africans all over this planet. This is American black nigger exceptionalism.
Right on. Say it again.
I can't say it. I don't even use that word.
Exactly.
I don't allow people to come into my sphere of influence talking about niggas. Right. But I know a few. And I do believe in reality. These people say, listen to this, that solidarity is transactional. Right? I'm going to support you once I find out what's in it for me. You really can't be more backward than that.
Exactly.
I'm going to support justice if you give me something. Even more backward than that is, you're raising this, you give me something, to people who are actively suffering from an ongoing genocide. Right. Being murdered by the tens of thousands Almost 10% of the population has been killed or maimed. And you talking about what's in it for me? No. And this is why we said we're not going to get stuck on the details of our connections. Because we want people to understand what Sharon just said. This is about your values. This is about what you believe. This is about your faith. This is about your solidarity with other human beings. This is about right or wrong. And because it is about right or wrong, when you choose wrong, there are consequences. And this is what our community has to understand. I said from the beginning, we are drawing a line. And the people who do not step across and support us in this anti-Zionist struggle are going to be considered on the other side of the line. Why do we draw a line? Because we need to know who to take aim at. That's right. We know which way to point our guns. We know which way to direct our resistance. We know which way to direct our words. We are at a war, and we have defined the enemy, and the enemy is a Zionist. And they must be destroyed. We say two words over and over again. And I have no qualms in telling you that my intent is to consciously implant in your subconscious mind, not your conscious mind, not the part of you that's thinking and rational, but the part of you that's feeling and spiritual, to implant these two words in your mind. And I'm gonna ask you all, but I've asked every audience I've spoken to since the Al-Aqsa flood began, is to repeat these two words with me 7 times. I found out, and I realized Kwanzaa does this to us too, you know. They say, I figured it out yesterday. They told me to say Harambe 7 times. I said, oh, that's 7. The repetition of that term implants that in your heart and in your mind. So we asking you to repeat these two words. Smash Zionism. 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 So when you go to sleep at night, and the question pops up in your dream, what do we do about Palestine? Your subconscious mind is going to yell to you, smash Zionism. And that's what we're here for. That's what we want to implant. This, you talk about propaganda, is a 2-word slogan. We want to put those 2 words on the lips of every African in the United States, smash Zionism. I'm trying to organize a campaign, one day, coming soon, where everybody's Facebook, Twitter, X, or whatever social media you engaged in are posting the word smash Zionism at the same time. Because if you say it, it don't mean nothing. And if you say it, it don't mean nothing. And if y'all over there say it, it don't mean nothing. But when all of us say it at the same time, 7 times, over and over and over again, it will go viral. Because our power is in our unity. And even if you don't know what the word means, smash Zionism, you will advance the cause of the struggle to smash Zionism. So this is the campaign that we're connecting to the struggle to build an anti-Zionist united front. And our campaign, our slogan is smash Zionism. we're gonna we're making Smash Zionism stickers that you can take and stick them up everywhere you go. Make Smash Zionism postcards so you can send to your friends. We're gonna smash Zionism banners and flyers and everything, everywhere. Smash Zionism, smash Zionism, smash Zionism. And our community, we like slogans.
Yeah, we do.
That's right. Now, we had a slogan that arose in 1968. No, 66.
Watch out now.
When Kwame Ture reluctantly, people don't know this, he was reluctant to yell Black Power from that stage. SNCC had already decided that they was moving away from Freedom Now, which was their slogan, to Black Power. But he wasn't convinced that the people were ready. My big brother, Mukasa Ricks, told him, use Black Power now. Use Black Power now. And he was forced him into it. And he yelled Black Power. Now, the power of the Black Power movement wasn't in its utterance. The power in the Black Power movement was in its repetition. And it's not that it was repeated by us. It was repeated by ABC. It was repeated by NBC. And it was repeated by CBS. They made a mistake in repeating it. And about 45 minutes after he said it, there was a Black Power movement in South Africa. There was a Black Power movement in Ghana. There was a Black Power movement in Harlem. There was a Black Power movement in Britain. There was a Black Power movement all over the United States. It was the power of repetition that was accessed through the media. They cut us off after that. Sharon will remember this. We had an African Liberation Day celebration. They had 10,000 Africans, Palestinians, and Native Americans walking from Malcolm X Park to the White House. The Palestinians had a flag that was 1 block long. It took 500 people to carry the damn flag. We walked in front of the White House and we did not get one mention in the mainstream media. Not ABC, not NBC, not CBS, not public access, nothing. The next day, some white boy from Nebraska chained himself to the White House fence. It was the lead story from Dan Rather, Walter Cronkite, all of them made that a real story. And since then, they don't put us on their mainstream media. And this is like, what, 30 years now, 30, 40 years now. They don't give us mainstream media, but they got a problem called social media. They no longer are in absolute control of what goes out among the people. We have access. We need to use that access, right? To popularize these two words, smash Zionism. And in doing so, we will create the conditions where the Palestinians are not being told to come into the hood. We will create conditions where the hood will invite the Palestinians to come among us as our comrades and our brothers and sisters and our friends to engage in this common struggle. So this is where we are, right? Here in Philly, you got to pull everybody together, yo. Right? You need all of the churches and Sister Sharon and Jibo and Black Radical Christians have decided that they would take the lead in pushing all of these preachers to come on this side of the line. We need to organize our student organizations. We need to organize our youth organizations. We need to organize our women organizations. I even think we should go out and get the fraternities and sororities and tell them you on the wrong side of history and come on this side before we start shooting on the other side of the line, right? This is a serious thing. It's not going to be done overnight, right? It's not going to be instant, and it's not going to get immediate relief. What we're doing here is not going to stop the genocide that's going on in Gaza. But what it will do is make sure that our children don't have to fight this fight. Because it's a protracted struggle that we are committed to, that we will not stop until we achieve victory. So with that question, what was the question? Sam, you want to say something?
Okay.
Sam.
First of all, Sam Kitab, I'm a Palestinian, I'm a Christian. I was born in Bethlehem, raised in Jerusalem. I want to thank each and every one for their activism, for their willingness to speak on subjects that are not necessarily mainstream subjects that are popular. As a Palestinian, I could tell you that on October 29th, 2 of our cousins were in Gaza, and they found shelter in the oldest church in the world, 2,000-year-old church. And they were killed. They were bombed. This gentleman that you guys might have seen next to me, his name is Mu'tasim. He's from Gaza. He had his hand blown up, his arm blown off, because he went outside his house for a minute. He was not a combatant. I say this to you because I want you to know how much we feel the fight and how much we feel the destruction. But at the same time, I say to you is that this energy that you have, don't take sides. As we've heard, right and wrong. Not this guy is Hamas or this guy is Zionist, or it doesn't matter. It's a matter of being right and wrong. And when somebody is wrong, you got to call it wrong. And when somebody's right, you got to stand with them. Because as a Christian, this is what my faith asks of me. It doesn't ask me to just give a carte blanche. It doesn't ask me just to hate for sake of hating. It asks me to forgive when there's asking to be forgiven. We do not hate Jews. They're our cousins.
That's right. That's
whether they like it or not.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
We do hate Zionism.
Unapologetically.
So extremism is not something you want to take sides with. Always stand on the righteousness.
That's right. That's right.
Do not let the news, the media, our government dictate your path. Let your faith, let your righteousness guide you. Because for us, it's all about a free Palestine. And a free Palestine means no occupation. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know is once we get our liberation, whether we will be part of Jordan, whether there'll be a Palestinian state, whether we'll be part of Israel, but it's the occupation that is wrong.
That's right.
And that's what we struggle for. So I really want to thank everyone, especially Pan, for inviting me. You guys are amazing. And the students, God bless you. You guys have taken some heat for the last 2 years. But again, it's all about right and wrong. And if you see us doing something wrong, you got to call it. Don't give us a pass. Thank you.
Free, free Palestine! 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 Viva, viva Palestina! 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 Trump, Trump, you should know! You should know. Zionism gotta go. Zionism gotta go. Thank you all.
Yeah.
We had a wonderful evening. I'm hoping everyone took the time to sign up on the at the table there. There's plenty of material about Zionism there, and thank you all once again for having us, Sharon. Thank you for having us.